Back to the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach. So remember, by the way, wherever you're looking at us on social media, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, please like this video and share it. More importantly, Joe and I, we like to think all of our shows, we have something to say. Today, we extremely have something to say because we're welcoming back to the program Sahih Hudayar, who was elected the prime minister in exile of the East Turkestan government on November 11, 2019. And the topic of the conversation today is the FBI has busted Chinese police stations. Sahih, correct me if I'm wrong. That's both in America and Canada, correct?
Yes, this is here in the United States. One that specifically that they arrested were individuals who opened up and ran the Chinese so-called, I mean, it is a police station, but the way that the Chinese called it is like service centers or whatever in New York.
Okay, so we're going to get into that in a second. That's and again, that's why you're on here, because we want to discuss this because we think our audience and everybody out there should know about this. Very quick introduction for those of you who are not familiar. Sahih Hudayar, as I said, was elected prime minister in exile of the East Turkestan government in 2019. He was born to a Uyghur family, business family in Atush, East Turkestan, studied international studies and politics at the University of Oklahoma, and was a member of the Army National Guard from 2011 to 2013. He is currently pursuing a master's in national security studies from the American Military Institute. Mr. Hudayar is fluent in Uyghur, Turkish, and English. He's married and currently resides with his wife in Northern Virginia. So welcome back again, Sahih. We really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Joe Resinello, where do you want to start?
I think a good place to start is just to get some background. How and why would the Chinese government establish like a clandestine police station in America or Canada? I mean, like, to be honest with you, why and how would they do that?
Well, I mean, as far as why they would do this is because they're a totalitarian, authoritarian state. They want to ensure that regardless of where, people might be, those that they view are against their regime or that they view as their enemies, they want to keep a check on them. They want to intimidate them. They want to, silence them. In many cases, they want them to even work for them and to engage in, espionage activities in countries across the world. So this is actually quite common in the field of Chinese intelligence, but it's just now coming to the forefront to where Western governments like the United States and Canada are actually starting to pay attention. This is not something new.
Well, Sahih, talking about paying attention. Okay, so recently the FBI was paying attention, and they helped shut down a clandestine Chinese, like, as we're saying, quote unquote, police station in Manhattan after the arrest of 2 alleged operatives. So if you wouldn't mind, please let our audience know about that incident. What happened there?
So it's not really quite clear when they initially opened this police station, but the Chinese government, and this is just one of many, according to reports that are operating in the United States and Canada, and God knows if there are many in other places across the world. I would think that there are other places, other such facilities in other parts of the world. It took a while for the U.S. government, for the FBI to, investigate and realize that, this was indeed a Chinese intelligence station. That's what it really is. It's not a police station. It was being run by United Workfront operatives in touch with Chinese Ministry of State Security, or MSS agents, which is China's version of like the FBI and CIA combined. They don't have their intelligence agency is all just one, essentially. And these individuals, what they were doing was they were, bringing in people to this police station, to this intelligence site in New York, and essentially interrogating them, harassing them, having the local police in China reach out and make them speak with their relatives on camera, saying, oh, if you do this, or you need to stop doing whatever activities, or we want you to get this information or that information, or in many cases saying, oh, we want you to come back if you want your relative to be free and not be harmed. You need to come back and atone for whatever your crimes that they suspect or allege of committing. So this is the type of work that these so-called service centers, what are essentially, I wouldn't even call it police stations, and more reality is just intelligence sites. That's what they are, intelligence points in other countries. Luckily, the FBI has obviously, arrested these individuals. They're still looking into other locations, which is a good thing, but it's also, coming out very late. This is something that China has been doing for years, if not decades.
It sounds eerily familiar. Let me ask you this. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we're being joined by Sahih Hudayar, who is the prime minister of the East Turkestan government in exile. Sahih, let me ask you, we're familiar with the Cold War. Obviously, we know that under Stalin, he had American operatives. Okay. He called them useful idiots. In this case, are there American useful idiots that are doing the work of the Chinese government that you know of?
I mean, I can't pinpoint specifically to one or two individuals, but I'm pretty sure there are many. There are many cases of this. I mean, the fact that the Chinese government, Chinese intelligence has been able to, quite influence American politicians, influence all, infiltrate and influence all parts of American society, shows that there are, useful idiots. If not, why would this be happening? For example, many of our companies, American companies, are kowtowing to China. These companies also have a role in shaping American foreign policy and domestic policy, and because of their business connections, because of elite capture by the Chinese government, they are putting or influencing politicians either directly or indirectly to implement policies that are much weaker or softer on China, and that doesn't really hurt China's so-called core interests. And we see this happening even in my own case. For example, this is something that I personally experienced. To date, we don't know what really happened. I was falsely, accused of so-called threats by a suspected Chinese intelligence operative, and then it took the FBI, for whatever reason. Well, it was a secret service, but they handed me over to the FBI. They arrested me on false charges of terrorism. Because again, I advocate for independence. I'm a Uyghur, and the Chinese government sees all Uyghurs who advocate for independence as terrorists. And after I was interrogated underground in some location for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and then the government, the FBI, was like, "Oh, we realize you're not a terrorist, but you threatened this woman." And even with that, we put forth all the evidence. I made no such threats. We put forth all evidence that this individual was CCP operative. Even her own LinkedIn profile show that she worked for CCP government agencies, PRC and CCP agencies. Yet, despite that, for 3.5 years, the Justice Department tried to pressure me into accepting a plea deal, saying, oh, if you don't accept this, we're going to charge you with, anti-Asian hate crime. And I said, look, how is any of the actions that I've engaged in anti-Asian hate crime? I'm over here advocating for the US government to recognize the genocide, to stop these atrocities, to actually stop the Chinese, government, which is the actual racists, and even with that, finally, without even giving me a jury trial, without even getting anything, after 3.5 years, they just closed the case and wiped off every evidence of all the documents on the DC government court website. And that individual, to my knowledge, still roams around. The suspected Chinese operative still roams around freely. So why is this happening? Like, if there wasn't, useful idiots within our own government, this type of situation wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't take 3.5 years for them to realize that, if this is information that I could find with my private investigators, you would think that our own intelligence agencies would have better tools and capabilities to find out who's who and come to a conclusion. Whoa, this is a Chinese game that we're being, thrown into. There, we're attacking. We're, accusing our own American citizen of something he didn't commit based on the false allegations made by a Chinese operative. This is the thing. Like,
this is an untenable
yeah.
situation.
So yeah, I think there are useful, American idiots in all sects of American society, from our government to our intelligence agencies to the halls of Congress. If this was not the case, then you would see things playing out differently.
Yeah, well, let's hope they do. Joe Rossinello.
With regard to talking about influence, there's a crisis right now in Canada regarding the election, the 2021 election, that China basically, pulled some levers with regard to who would win. We also have heard with Joe Biden, they gave a lot of money to the University of Pennsylvania. Also, I'm sure that came with certain, asks. How active are they with regard to influencing elections, to your knowledge?
Well, I mean, as far as influencing elections, to my knowledge, I mean, they seem to be pretty active, especially when it comes to influencing elections of representatives, of mayors, of things of that sort. They want to start small, cultivate them from a very early stage, and then gradually elevate them as they progress in their career. This is the type of things that, not just China, but also even in the Soviet Union. This is the type of things that the Soviet Union did in trying to influence American elections, and trying to, cultivate future American leaders to positions, compromising them. And we see this. Even our president, Mr. Biden. It seems that there are reports coming out that he's engaged in, or allegedly involved in some corruption scheme involving some foreign nationals. And who are those foreign nationals? It's not really clear, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Chinese. I mean, his own son had a lot of business dealings with the Chinese. These are things that are not being, properly investigated by our intelligence agencies, or if they are being investigated, for whatever reason, they're not, acting upon the evidence that they have. And so it seems there's been a lot of elite capture of American, officials, elites by the Chinese government.
Yeah, Sahih, Hudayar, let me ask you this. Let's get a little bit specific when we talk about, let's say, politicians, so-called leaders in Washington. You recently commented on New York politicians like Democrat Representative Grace Ming, okay? And you stated that she owes the American public an explanation, given that her congressional district is home to a sizable Chinese community. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. Well, so when it comes to Representative Grace Ming, I mean, she's representing a community, a district in New York, which has a sizable Chinese community, and many of these Chinese people in this area, like especially even when you look at the so-called police station or intelligence site, which is an intelligence site, not a police station, but if you look at that, I mean, the fact that it was in her district and she was not aware of this, the fact that she was meeting with these individuals and she wasn't aware of this, I mean, she should be more aware of anyone else that the Chinese government is, targeting Chinese dissidents and Chinese diaspora groups, more than any other politician. She should have been the one raising the alarm to the U.S., intelligence services, to the U.S. government and other agencies, stating, hey, we have this problem. There are, my constituents or members of my constituents are being harassed by, Chinese operatives or suspected Chinese operatives. Could you look into this? Can you, brief me on what you guys know? what can we do to stop this? Instead of doing that, you don't see that happening. Instead, she's like, oh, I didn't know. It wasn't until after the arrest that she was like, well, even after the arrest, she's like, well, I didn't know. Well, it's your duty as the representative of that district to know what's going inside in that district, what's happening to your constituents. Many of the people of that district stated, they are being harassed and intimidated and coerced by Chinese operatives.
That's it. When I hear stuff like that, I get disgusted, because then, someone who claims to represent, like, they'll call us racist for, like you mentioned, Sahih Hudayar, they'll call us racist because we're pointing out these actions of the Chinese government. She's selling it. What you just said to Joe and I, she's selling out her own people that she represents by letting them be subjected to this, to this inquisition by or threats and coercion by the Chinese government. I mean, would you think of it that way, that she's selling them out?
I mean, it seems that, I don't want to be too harsh, but it seems that she's, not fulfilling her, responsibilities as an elected U.S. government official. Her loyalty is to the U.S., American people. Her loyalty is to her constituents, not, the Chinese government, not some Chinese, intelligence front network that is, giving her a little title or plaque of participation, or giving her donations for her, campaign or whatever.
Sally, I will tell you this: you're much more charitable than I am towards Representative Grace Ming. But Joe Resinello.
Recently in the news, we saw those spy balloons going across North America. We saw them in Canada. We saw them in the U.S. What are those countries, respectively, particularly the U.S. and Canada, doing to be proactive to stop such? I mean, that was just so in your face. I mean, it was shocking. To be honest with you, it was also shocking the lack of response, how long it took to finally take these down. Your comments on that?
From what I see, there's little being done, unfortunately. And this is where China is being even more emboldened, because seeing the fact that, the US government or Western governments aren't doing anything. It's not like that they don't know. It's clear from, the intelligence reports and stuff that we know publicly, that the US government has been, monitoring some of these activities, or they know about what's happening, but they're not taking any actions to stop it. That's the biggest issue here is, it's like I'm saying, I know there's genocide going on, or I know they're spying on me, but I'm not going to do anything. I mean, if it was happening in some other country, okay, that's fine. But this is a violation of America's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Imagine, imagine if it were any other country, let's say Russia decided to, put a balloon over U.S. territory or U.S. airspace. You bet the U.S. would immediately shoot that down as soon as it crossed into U.S. airspace. But whatever reason, again, I think this is partially because of elite capture and influence of Chinese government in the United States and its government, really, the halls of Congress. I think the U.S. is just like, oh, well, we don't want to provoke China. Well, they're violating your airspace. They're provoking you. They're trying to see how much they can get away. They're trying that's just, in my view, that's just a test to see whether the United States is going to, is serious about, standing up to China. All of our politicians, we talk, oh, we need to be tough on China. China's doing this, China's doing that. We need to be tough. China is a threat to America's security. Yet we just let their balloon, pass over America for God knows how many days before we're like, oh, after public pressure, only after the public knew about it, after public pressure, did our politicians decide to act and shoot it down. So it's like, even with this case, it was only after public pressure, when public, NGOs broke news, started investigating into these police stations, into these Chinese intelligence facilities, that our government, to save face, had to act, and they acted by, arresting 2 individuals. Whereas if you look at the reports by other NGOs, there's, many other, possibly a dozen or more other such facilities across the United States.
Salih, I got to be honest with you. We have limited time, and I have a million questions based on that. Let me ask you this. Let me bring it down for a second to a political level in America. This goes to both parties. I mean, because our attitude is this. Joe and I say on the show all the time, you have the right that bows at the altar of the free market. They won't do anything. They won't do anything to hold corporations accountable. You got the left, who, I'm sorry, the American left. I said this during when I was younger, when Russia was still the USSR. There's people that don't like the American system of government. They prefer communism or socialism, and that's what you find on the left. This is here's the question: is this not across party lines? Is this not something that let's say Americans need to know, that both parties are guilty of giving China a pass on this? The right in particular, because they just want to let corporations do what they want. Just let them go and do business in China. Apple does business. Everybody does business in China. Oh, and we can't do anything. We can't do anything to hurt our American corporations. Am I wrong about that? Or is this really this is a uniparty problem, which is what a lot of people say what we have?
I would say this is even beyond that. This is a whole of societal problem. I mean, they've infiltrated all parts of American society, from, our politicians on both political parties to, our business, corporations, to even, smaller, states, politicians in states, like elected officials in smaller states, which to us, we're like, oh, why should that matter? But they're buying up, land, they're buying up, all these access to resources here within the United States, which might not seem, oh, it's just land, but they're buying it up closer to our military bases. They're buying up, resources that would be valuable, access to resources that would be valuable to the United States in the future, in the event if there is a conflict. These are all, subtle moves that China is taking, and our politicians on both sides, they're like, oh yeah, we agree that, China's a threat, but they're not doing anything besides talking. That's the problem. We need our companies like Apple and others to, pull out of China, because one, China is engaging in an ongoing genocide. It's facilitate, most of the products that we consume from China are tainted with forced or slave labor in most cases. And by buying by buying Chinese products, what we are doing is, one, essentially, we're tacitly supporting genocide. We're tacitly endorsing the, slave and forced labor of innocent people. More importantly, we're, empowering the Chinese government, the Chinese nation. Every dollar that we spend, a part of that, even if it's 1%, is going to the Chinese government for them to, spend on their influence operations, to spend on their military buildup, all of these things, which are aimed. China doesn't shy away from calling the United States an enemy. Unlike our politicians, we're like, oh, we shouldn't call the U.S. We shouldn't call China an enemy. We'll call it a competition, or we'll do this, taking all these, steps to be more, quote, diplomatic. Yet China clearly is like, America's our enemy. We're going to take down America. We're going to become number one. And we are helping China become number one by continuing to buy more Chinese products, by continuing to turn a blind eye to all of China's influence and espionage operations. This has to stop soon, or else.
Well, Salih Hudayar, that's why we're glad that you're out there, okay? Because if the one thing that I think would help in this battle, and it is a battle, is to raise the consciousness of the American people. As you mentioned earlier about the public outcry over the balloons, when the public knows about these things, then there's more likely to be some sort of positive action. Unfortunately, Salih, we only have 5 minutes left. I'm going to give it over to Joe for one more question.
Just to piggyback off of what you just said, I mean, the West loves to talk about human rights. United States, Canada, constantly human rights, human rights, human rights. Yet they do nothing about a genocide. This is clear as the nose on my face as far as knowledge. It's known to people, and they just compartmentalize it. They rationalize it away. Why is that? I mean, to be honest with you, where's the UN? Where is Joe Biden? Where is Europe? Where is Canada? Where is Australia? I mean, they're always talking about human rights constantly. Yet here we have another global genocide. You mentioned slave labor. They say nothing. They pretend like it's not there, and it is there. Your thoughts?
Well, again, this comes down to, Chinese influence and elite capture. Since, China, or since the West opened up to China, is the real term. It's not China opened up to the West. It's the West who opened up to China. We allowed the Chinese to essentially infiltrate and influence all parts of global society, including the UN. About a decade ago, the US was like the #1 contributor to the UN. Now it's China. Now China, dictates and calls the shots in terms of, the UN. That's why the UN is silent to this genocide. Whereas if it was happening in any of the other places, the UN would be the first to call it out. When it comes to domestically, why our own governments are failing to act, again, it's because unfortunately many parts of our society, from our business elites to even parts of our political elites, have been captivated by China, and they've been influenced, and they are essentially taking actions or not taking actions that would be detrimental to China's so-called, core interests. And they, as you said, they talk about human rights, but they're not acting on it. Every year, all of our, elites, from our politicians to, Hollywood to, think tanks to business corporations, all of them vow never again shall we ever allow a genocide to occur. Yet there's a 21st century genocide going on at this very moment, and they're silent, because when it comes to China, it seems everyone is, silent, and that's because nothing is being done to stop China's malign influence in our society, and that's the biggest issue, is taking action against that malign influence. The sooner we do it, the better, the more free we will be as American society, the more secure we will be in the future. If we continue to allow this to happen, then China will ultimately, succeed in its grand strategy, and the United States will be, replaced by China, in which the world will see, will become a more totalitarian, world order.
Yeah, one of the emptiest statements that you hear out there is when you hear "never again." It means nothing, because it happens over and over and over. You know that, Sahih Hudayar, firsthand, and we've seen it in our lifetimes. Even just going back till that phrase was even invented. Okay, it's like, what about that group? What about that group? What about? It doesn't seem to matter. It's only whatever is politically expedient. Those are the only genocides that matter. Okay, and the ones that are not politically expedient or useful, then nobody cares. Just like you mentioned about the Uyghurs, Joe and I talk on the show about Christians across the world being persecuted every single day in Africa and killed. And it's like, that's why, like we said, Sally, we're so grateful that you came on the show, because we have to keep talking like this. We have to keep getting the message out to the American people. Sooner or later, even with the mainstream media and the hammerlack they have, okay, sooner or later, through social media and other means, we're going to get that message out there, because I think the American people are good people. I love my country. Okay. And the bottom line is, I think they're kept deliberately in the dark. They don't want to hear these conversations. Your politicians and your corporations don't want us to have these conversations about China and the atrocities that go on. Sahih Hudayar, let me ask you this. Let our audience know what they could do more to find out information on you, your situation, more on this topic, and anything you want our audience to know.
Well, they can follow us on social media, on Twitter at @EtExileGov or at Sahih Hudayar. They can visit our website at east-turkestan.net. And the simplest thing to do is just Google Uyghur genocide or Google East Turkestan.
Absolutely. And anybody watching this, please, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you see it, share. Just share this video wherever you see it. So as we said here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we could get the message out there as to exactly what's going on, both with China operations around the world, and specifically when you talk about quote unquote police stations in America and Canada. Sally, thanks as always. You know, you're always welcome on the show. Whatever you want to talk about, please just let us know. But thank you again, brother.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you all out there for joining us. Remember, our conversation with the Frontline with Joe and Joe is your conversation, and that conversation is going on every